All right, back on the agenda, we're on issue number 2, the decertification of the Sonoma Developmental Center.
Thank you, Patricia Flannery. A couple of questions here. I'll roll through the information, and then if I haven't answered the question, please help me out there. I'm going to hope to capture it all.
Okay. Thank you.
Today at Sonoma, there are 453 men and women who live at that facility. 200 of those men and women live in the nursing facility. The remaining 253 live in the intermediate care, requiring a full range of services. Back in 2012, the California Department of Public Health and the Federal Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, CMS, conducted a couple of surveys at the Sonoma Developmental Center, and at that time raised concern about issues related to quality of care. Some of the significant issues that were identified were allegations of abuse, response, investigations, quality of nursing care, overall system concerns, staffing, numbers of staff, knowledge of staff, competencies of staff. In January of 2013, the department submitted a letter to the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid and withdrew 4 of the certified units from the provider agreement. At that time, there were 10 units at Sonoma in the ICF that were certified. The department withdrew 4, recognizing the seriousness of the concerns that had been raised and the issues within those 4 respective units. In March of 2013, the department entered into a program improvement plan that included a technical addendum. And the program improvement plan at that point was responsive to maintaining the certification and the license of the ICF and the certification or the FFP specific to the 6 certified units. The department's commitment all along has been any changes implemented in the ICF would happen for all of the men and women living in ICF, regardless of whether they resided on a certified unit or a unit that had been withdrawn from the provider agreement. The program improvement plan and the technical addendum included some very specific requirements on the part of the department and the part of the Sonoma Developmental Center leadership moving forward. Initially, we entered into a contract with the program improvement plan, referred to as the PIP, has the requirement to contract with an independent consultative review expert, known as the ICRE. And that once we contracted with that entity, the ICRE would conduct first a root cause analysis, which was completed at Sonoma. They would then work to develop an action plan, which was also developed for Sonoma. The action plan really honing in on the issues identified from the surveys, as well as the issues that came up as a result of the root cause analysis. So that action plan became the framework and has been the framework for the work moving forward at Sonoma to retain the certification on those 6, what was then 6 units, and to regain the certification in the 4 decertified units. Since that time, Sonoma has opened up a 7th certified unit, so there are now 11 units within the ICF. And one of the concerns raised through the survey was the concentration of residents in one location and the mix of individuals based on their support needs. And so as a result, an assessment was done for everyone in the ICF, and the need to open another unit occurred. So today there are 11 units associated with the ICF. With the ICF, yes, sorry. We have been, the department has participated in monthly reviews of progress with the Department of Public Health, the CMS, Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, and the ICRE entity to understand the progress at Sonoma, to understand where the change and growth needs to occur, and to be sure that we're staying on track with what the expectation is. The earliest we could have a survey at Sonoma to verify the progress and the change that has occurred is sometime in April. The Department of Public Health has been clear that it is an unannounced survey, so we will know when they arrive, when that survey occurs, but we do expect that survey to happen sometime in April for the 7 certified units. And then with the successful completion of that survey, the department then has the ability to request a revisit for those 4 decertified units, at which point the survey would occur. Again, with successful completion, there is then a reassurance survey that is conducted through the federal process of certification that we would expect to happen anywhere between a month, 1 to 3 months. Significant progress has been noted at the Sonoma Developmental Center. The independent entity that has been a part of the ongoing compliance and monitoring, they have a presence at the facility almost daily. They are involved in meetings that are resident-specific meetings. They are involved in meetings with the administration of the facility. They are in everything at the facility to understand how the facility is doing with progress. Some very specific areas where change has been noted. The independent entity has communicated that they absolutely see a change of culture occurring at Sonoma. Those very committed employees that the department had spoken of previously have absolutely stepped up, understand the issues, are learning ways to provide services differently than have been the history of the developmental center system. So there has been a recognized change in the culture and recognized in the way we're working with the men and women specifically. There's been an intensive effort towards person-centered planning. Training was brought in by an outside consultant in the fall of last year for all staff involved in the person-centered planning part of developing that individual program plan that each person served would have, and then developing programs based on that person-centered planning. The facility initiated a process referred to as a whole person review about a year ago, actually January of last year, and at that time, that process was to have a committee take a look at each person based on the assessment information and understand the behavioral support needs, the way we can enhance behavioral programs for those people who have any restrictions or limited access concerns. There has been progress noted in that area. The number of people who require enhanced or one-on-one supervision at Sonoma has reduced by relieving some of the access restrictions and the requirements within the program. There has been a reduction in incidents between people who live together on units, one of the areas that was of concern noted in the survey. There is an overall downward trend in incidents in general. So I think those are important pieces of, while they're the negative side of the world that we live in, they are indicators of care and services improving because of the safety and the supervision that is being provided. One of the areas identified by the survey team was around mealtime, one of those very important times in our lives, and what was observed as, I'll use the word, somewhat chaotic for the men and women who lived at Sonoma. A significant change has occurred in those areas. Most recent reports have noted tremendous progress, calmer environments that any one of us might want to go in and sit down and have a meal, staff sitting with people at the table, attentive to what their needs are, and really an easier, softer flow to what a mealtime activity might look like for people in the developmental center. There is still change needed, and I am a believer that the change that has occurred at Sonoma today has been in part because of the leadership that the department was able to bring into the developmental center. As you know, we hired a new executive director just about a year ago, in I think April of last year, and she has provided direction, leadership, and partnership to all of the stakeholders who are involved with the developmental center today, and has been an important part of providing that stability and support to the staff, but clearly communicating the message of change being needed at the facility. The one area that we recognize, and in working with the independent entity and the Department of Public Health, where change has to continue, is in relation to the person-centered planning and what becomes a natural part of annual reviews and development of the individual program plans that then lead to implementation of meaningful programs for people. And while there is progress in that area, it is still an area of focus for the leadership at Sonoma and for the programs for people living there today. One of the areas outlined in the survey and of concern was staffing. And staffing is a big category as it relates to the survey process. But one of the issues was having enough staff on board to be able to support the supervision needs, the support needs of the residents, and to be able to do that with reduced overtime or reduced impact to those employees who were working. The amount of hiring activity that is occurring at Sonoma today and has been occurring for the last year and a half or so is incredible. They are on a continual hiring mode of attempting to bring new employees into the developmental center. Since March of 2013 to date, they have been able to hire 210 new employees to the developmental center. And at that same time, promote 121 employees within the center who have moved into other assignments or roles. One of the significant factors in hiring has surprisingly been the number of people who declined offers when the job, once they completed the selection process, went through a background clearance and a reference check, they then declined the offers. In this same period of time, we've had 193 people who went through the process and either declined and or failed the background check specific. So while all of this hiring is going on, there is also this difficulty with a number of people who are at the end of the day saying thank you, no thank you, and or we're saying we wouldn't be able to bring you into this very important service delivery.
Yes, Senator Money.
What reason are applicants giving who decline if they haven't been disqualified based on a background check?
Initially, employees or prospective candidates were declining because of the media attention, because of the focus on things that were happening within the developmental center. In the local community of Sonoma, there was some pretty intense scrutiny from the stakeholders surrounding the developmental center, and so I think initially that's when people had decided that they weren't interested in coming on board. Today we're evaluating some options relative to recruitment and retention or hiring above minimum. Some of our developmental centers have that process in place. That's not true for Sonoma. So when we have people who are interested in coming to the facility, they may be coming from employment where they'd be taking a reduction in salary. So we're evaluating that piece of it today and its impact. But
are there housing options for employees?
We do have some housing options on campus that become available for employees, especially those who are relocating and short-term housing needs.
Thank you.
I also understand the length of the process is very timely. What can we do to make sure that that's not an issue?
Yeah, we have looked at that. The average clearance process is close to 90 days. which is an extensive hiring time period. Some are shorter, some are longer. The two factors that tend to extend the hiring process are if somebody has a criminal history check and that clearance, that fingerprint comes back with some record, we have to investigate the circumstances of the case and understand if it would conflict with somebody being employed at the facility. And then the other, surprisingly, is the response back on reference checks. So as we reach out to former employers or some other state departments to try and capture, the past history, has been, I think, the factor that's been the longest piece of information.
Can you also comment on the challenges reducing the number of licensed to unlicensed staff members, the ratio? How are you addressing that?
I think the most significant piece of it is really associated with the challenges around hiring in general and the number of people that we have either lost through background checks or those who declined to make an offer or to accept the offer. 75 of the 193 were level of care nursing, so licensed staff who declined offers of employment, and 32, so well over 50% of the 193 who declined or failed backgrounds were specifically level of care nursing positions. So I think the facility, again, incredible amount of work, can't speak enough to the amount of time and energy they're spending in trying to fill vacant positions or fill positions, bring licensed staff in. They've extended their recruitment efforts beyond what their past experiences have been. They've been on Craigslist. They've been in Facebook. They've been tapping into local entities, sending information out to professional organizations. They are today talking with someone from Germany, a psychiatrist interested in coming in. So they really have been far-reaching in their efforts to recruit. Just have had some challenges around bringing licensed staff in.
Okay, thank you very much.
The process, as I mentioned, relative to the recertification or maintaining the certification at Sonoma at this point, we would expect an unannounced survey sometime in April. And then once that survey is successful, we will then request a recertification of the 4 decertified units. The compliance officer from the independent entity has been on board at Sonoma the entire time and will continue through this process. One of the questions asked was to address the issue of sustainability.
Yes.
And can appreciate that. I think, again, a culture shift is underway, recognized and acknowledged by those who are coming into the facility and looking at how care and services are being provided and how staff are approaching the care and services provided. The new leadership has been an important piece of putting systems in place of accountability, systems that are evaluating policies that would make changes in the long-term system improvement so that they are monitoring, tracking the progress, and making changes as they move forward in this process. A couple of key pieces that I think are important to the sustainability. Many of the resident-related training areas for staff now have competencies attached to them. So employees aren't attending training for purposes of learning about the curriculum and then going back to work. There are competencies associated with making sure that the staff have understood the training and are competent in the areas of care or need. There's a much stronger enhanced system of oversight and monitoring at the Sonoma Developmental Center, the systems through their quality assurance department, the systems that the governing body or the leadership at Sonoma have put in place to maintain regular tracking of data points that help them understand how care and services are being offered. The leadership at Sonoma has immersed themselves in the change. They are part of the training that happens for staff. They are out and about talking with staff. They are noting progress and reinforcing the message of change, and where needed, the refinement in the system of change at Sonoma. The emphasis overall has been about not maintaining or not achieving certification for purposes of now, but the long term for Sonoma in maintaining a quality of care and a responsiveness to the men and women who live here throughout.
Thank you very much. All right. Department of Finance, do you have any comments on this item? Legislative Analyst's Office?
Yes, Rashi Kesarwani with the Legislative Analyst's Office. In terms of the long-term future of the developmental centers, Secretary Dooley has provided a detailed overview of the report released by the Task Force on the Future of the DCs. We note that the report's recommendations to further develop community services and supports and to restructure the developmental centers are positions that our office has previously recommended. We therefore find elements of the report's recommendations to be an appropriate first step in addressing the need to restructure the developmental centers system. In terms of the immediate needs at the developmental centers, we have evaluated the budget request for Sonoma Developmental Center and find it to be reasonable and appropriate. The funding requested in 2014-15 of $5 million general fund is needed to continue to make improvements to restore federal funding and comply with federal certification requirements.
Okay, thank you very much. All right, we're going to go on to item 3, which is decertification risk of remaining developmental centers. Please proceed whenever you're ready.
Thank you. Patricia Flannery. The Fairview Developmental Center located in Costa Mesa, Lanterman Developmental Center located in Pomona, and Porterville Developmental Center located in Porterville all have undergone certification surveys within the last year, the last 12 months. And with each of those certification surveys, there have been issues identified in the ICF, specifically in the intermediate care facility portions of the 3 developmental centers. The surveys have identified issues of noncompliance with conditions of participation. As a result of that noncompliance, the department entered into a program improvement plan and a technical addendum with the Department of Public Health and the Federal Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services to support the activities associated with the change needed at Fairview, Porterville, and Lanterman. The program improvement plan specifically to Fairview and Porterville includes the department contracting with an independent entity, again, recognized as the Independent Consultative Review Expert, or ICRE, that the ICRE would come in and conduct a root cause analysis of both facilities, would develop an action plan that becomes the framework for the change needed at Fairview and Porterville, and would specifically provide the ongoing monitoring or the compliance monitoring to be sure that the facilities continue to move forward in efforts towards meeting the conditions of participation within ICF. The program improvement plan for Lanterman Developmental Center specifically is geared towards a contract with this ICRE as a monitor from this point forward through the transition of the last person out of the developmental center. The focus of the compliance monitoring for Lanterman is specific to the plan of correction that Lanterman put in place at the time of the survey findings, and then elements related to the technical addendum that include monitoring the staffing levels, monitoring the quality of care, making sure that the levels of supervision within the facility are in fact met as expected. So that's the parameters of the program improvement plan that the department entered into We do expect the ICRE to be on board. We're hopeful or the expectation is they'll be on board Tuesday of next week. They'll begin a root cause analysis at Fairview, as well as the monitoring at Lanterman, and then we'll be at Porterville at some point in the coming months. The timelines are that the root cause analysis will be completed by the end of May, the action plans developed by the end of June, and then the compliance monitoring for the next 6 months. The earliest we could request a revisit would be January of 2015. The program improvement plan for all 3 facilities allows the continuation of certification and FFP reimbursements through this period of time as we continue to be responsive, implement the changes needed, and continue to show ongoing progress towards compliance of the conditions of participation. The issues identified within the 3 facilities are similar to some of the issues identified at Sonoma, and then very different in some ways. The similarities include the concentration of residents in any one location. Again, thinking of the units or the homes, there was concern about the mix of people who live in any one home and the varying skills and capability levels, and that by that mix, it has presented situations of risk or harm to one or more residents. So facilities began the process. We contacted one of our consultant entities and asked them to provide us with an assessment process that would help us hone in specifically on the assessment of where people should live and the risks that are presented in their home environment and what makes the most sense for them. It has been a challenge in a downsizing process to try and find the right balance of roommates or housemates, given the number of people who live in any one location. Looking at that resident assessment and focusing on nursing care, nursing assessments, the similarities at the other developmental centers included a couple of significant events that occurred to residents of the developmental center, and there was question about the nursing assessment that occurred and the promptness of the nursing care based on that assessment. And so the resident assessment process that I talked about is about bringing in training to the nursing staff on resident nursing assessment parameters. We've brought together our directors of nurses from as a statewide entity to take a look at those areas that we think we are at greater risk. One of the examples included a person who had fallen and sustained an injury. So we have a new protocol, policy and protocol around fall prevention. The interest in all of our change is about prevention and then in response when circumstances occur. So we have our directors of nurses working on a series of statewide policy changes that will implement and impact services at the developmental centers. Staffing has been a concern in some ways similar to the Sonoma circumstance of supervision levels, staff knowing and understanding and implementing the levels of supervision that residents that they are assigned to provide care and services to has been an important piece of some circumstances that occurred where we have failed to provide the level of supervision that was required. And so there's been a series of training policy revisions at each of the facilities and retraining with staff on their obligations and assignments associated to what supervision levels are, depending on the need, and the implementation of those supervision levels. And then specific to Porterville was an environmental issue in the main kitchen. And today we're happy to say that the new main kitchen at Porterville is now open. And so we're glad to have that project in play. It was a capital outlay project from many years ago that was part of the new construction at the developmental center. Probably the last issue that is a similarity is some overall concerns about access. Residents having access to their environment, to their belongings, to their local communities. Looking at positive behavioral support programs, we have brought our senior psychologists from all facilities together. We have a final draft of a new policy around developing positive behavioral support programs and replacement behavior programs for people in our system, and the ongoing review and approvals of those processes. So that's a high-level review of the issues within the 3 developmental centers. As I mentioned, we do have a program improvement in place. That contractor, that agreement allows us to continue to receive FFP with ongoing monitoring to make sure that we sustain the change needed to be in compliance with the federal conditions of participation.
We have one more question that we'd like to ask you to touch on that was in the group of questions. Please tell us about the issues that were identified in the recent noncompliance notice related to Canyon Springs residential facility.
Sure. Canyon Springs is our small community facility located in Cathedral City down in the Palm Springs area. It is a facility that has anywhere from 52 to 55 men and women at any given time. The program itself underwent their annual recertification survey earlier this year. At the time of that recertification survey, there were issues noted and identified by the California Department of Public Health. The facility responded with a plan of correction that they had addressed the issues that were the incidents that had occurred leading up to the issues in the survey, but then also looked at system changes needed, submitted a plan of correction that was approved by the Department of Public Health, and implemented that plan of correction. As the process moves along, a revisit survey occurred at Canyon Springs last week, and on Friday we learned that the facility continues to be out of compliance with a condition of participation. At this point, we are in discussions with the Department of Public Health on what the next steps look like for Canyon Springs. We have not received official notification of that. As the process would occur, we will receive in writing what the final determination is, as well as a notification if it impacts our certification overall. The issues that were identified at Canyon Springs in some ways are similar to some of the supervision, certainly. The mix of people living together and the risks that their respective or individual behaviors and decision-making have on each other, and the harm that can sometimes occur as a result of that. The staff supervision and staff knowledge around the levels of supervision and making sure that they're following those levels. In each of the facilities, there have been some instances of late reporting of allegations of abuse. That was the case within the Canyon Springs most recently as well. Although the allegation was reported, it was late in its and against policy as far as how we expect allegations of abuse to be reported. And of course, the law is specific to mandated reporters and their obligation to report. And then a small piece associated with the investigations attached to those allegations of abuse. Again, the Canyon Springs facility has put a plan of correction in place. They are working on the issues that were identified in the first survey and in this most recent revisit, and we'll continue to have communication with the Department of Public Health as we move forward in this process.
So I'd just like to ask you a little more specifically what sort of actions are taking place. More appropriate supervision, clearly making careful decisions with regard to residents and their living arrangements, Any other specifics you can tell us?
Well, there have been some policy changes around the supervision levels, policy changes around the oversight and monitoring of the management team, policy decisions around when teams meet to discuss access, issues of access, people having access to their personal belongings or to their environment in total. There has been training. We had a consultant come in and provide training on abuse reporting, recognizing signs of abuse, understanding the requirements of mandated reporters, understanding, helping people who live at the facility advocate in relation to those circumstances. Policy changes on client supervision, training for staff specifically on those policy changes. The system change, implementing a tracking of documentation that at any given time someone should be able to look at it and know what that employee's obligation is and to talk to that employee about it, and then to provide the oversight and monitoring specific to who was responsible for an individual at any given time. Some redeployment of staff, decisions around where staff are at different shifts and with different individuals, redeployment of staff, and then a refining of what was the process at Canyon Springs around when an allegation is made, when an investigation is completed, and the decision-making about what the next steps at the facility will be. Because in those circumstances, it involves not only the facility administration, the Office of Protective Services, any other investigative body that might be involved in the process. So they've refined the policy they had in place for greater clarity and distinction between whose decision, when do we say this case is closed and we've resolved and taken all the actions necessary.
Were there any disciplinary actions?
I can certainly find out the answer to that. I don't know the answer to that today. Some of the findings that most recently came up in the last week would still be under review and perhaps investigation, so we may not know the answer to that, but I can follow up.
And can you also tell us how much federal funding might be at stake if a facility is decertified?
The FFP impact would be $667,000 per month for a total of $8 million a year.
That's pretty significant. Senator Monty, do you have any questions? No. Okay. All right.